Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me for today's episode in the study of the book of Genesis. This is Rooted in God's Word, episode number 17, where we're covering Genesis chapter 8, verse 20 through chapter 9, verse 4. We're covering really as Noah is coming out of the ark with his family. We have been covering this section on the life of Noah. Remember, this section happens 1,000 years after the creation event. After that creation event, 1,000 years had gone by, and the world had really been going off the rails when it comes to humanity. There were a lot of problems in humanity. There was the exploding population, as makes perfect sense because people were living extremely long lives, and there was 1,000 years of history that had taken place over that time. So you can just imagine how many children are being born and the explosion of population. We know that the world was very corrupt and evil, that there was violence around the world. We know that the hearts and the minds of people was only evil all the time. There was an evil intent. We know that there was demonic activity, and we know that there was extreme sexual perversion that was going on. And as a result of this, God was very sorry that He had made mankind, and He decided it was time to wipe them out. And this is the wrath of God that was going to come. Now, this is going to parallel again the end times events that we will see. If we are that generation that lives in the end times events, we will see those same kind of parallels as to the times of the life of Noah. But those 1,000 years that had happened since creation, the world was a very different place. It looked very different. It functioned in a very different way. And the wrath of God, the flood of God, was going to be the catalytic event that would change a lot of things. Now, what I want to do today is I want to put into the comments section or the notes section underneath this video, and hopefully those will appear. But I want to put some good links to some videos that you can watch that describe the Genesis account, that describe the flood event, and it comes from a scientific perspective as well as a biblical perspective on what those events would have caused and what the proof is that the flood of Noah actually existed, and this would have been the biggest thing that would have changed the way that the world functions today. So please look down in the comments in the notes section and make sure you click on those links and really follow those videos. They're incredibly insightful. You're going to learn from them, and I would highly encourage you to watch them. Well, the wrath of God came, the flood came upon the world. It was the 40 days, the 40 nights of rain. Now that would have been the torrential waters that were coming up from below, probably a lot of earthquake, a lot of movement in the geological formations. There would have been a lot of that releasing pressure from below, water from below, and the water vapor barrier from above that God released, and that let go, and that created a tremendous amount of rain around the world, a tremendous amount of this flood that we know of throughout the world. The world would have looked very, very different from the time before to the time after. And again, reference those videos because those are going to be incredibly helpful to you. So I really highly encourage you to watch those. Well, they had survived in the ark, Noah and his family, and the animals that were set aside. And it was not this small little boat that we get often depicted in, in children's Sunday school classes. It would have been a major event. It would have been a major boat that would have carried thousands and thousands of animals. God specifically told them what to do and what to bring, and they brought those animals, and they survived and came out on the other side of this catalytic event. Once they finally got to the point that they could get out of the ark and they began to restore life, the first thing that's going to happen is that God is going to, or that Noah is going to respond to God in worship, and God is going to really create a covenant with Noah. And that's what we're going to look at today and then next week, next session as well. So let's jump into this today, chapter 8, starting in verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. So I want you to notice this, that the first thing that happened as Noah left the ark is that Noah responded after leaving the ark with an act of worship. God has designed us to recognize Him and worship Him and Him alone. In fact, there are three areas of life that we are really tested on. One, we realize that God is the one who is in control, that God has the power to control. And we recognize his power control and we surrender to his power to control. As creator, he is in control of his creation. We also recognize that he has the right to judge his creation. God can set the standards and set those standards alone. He doesn't need our input on those standards over his creation. He is the judge over creation because it is his creation and he has the power to control his creation. And he also is the one who is deserving, he deserves all praise. And that is what's called worship. We ascribe to God the worth that he is due, and that happens through the aspect and the prospect of worship. And so God is the creator who is in control of all things, who is the judge of all things, and deserves praise from mankind. Now, what happened that caused mankind to go wrong would have been Adam and Eve when they sinned in the garden. They usurped God's authority and God's power and God's control. Adam and Eve essentially, with their decision to sin, said, I want control. They also essentially said, I want to be the one to judge. I want to judge. So I want to set the standards for mankind. I want to set the standards for my life. I don't want to follow your standards. I want to follow my standards. And then they also said, I want praise. Now, this is the same problem that every person faces in this world, that sin really, the sin nature drives within a person, that every person alive essentially says the same things. I want to control. I don't want to be under control. I don't want to be dependent. I want to be independent. I want to call the shots. I want to control you. I want to control me. I want to control my world around me. We also say, look, I want to judge and I want to set the standards for my own actions, for your actions. I want to judge you according to those standards. I want to punish you when you don't meet the standards that I have set. I want to be the judge, and then I want people to notice me. I want to be praised by people. I want to be applauded. I want to be the center of attention. When when Noah gets off of the ark, Noah is in right relationship with God. This has been eliminated out of Noah's life because of his relationship with God. By the way, when you come to the Lord and you are surrendered to him, you are essentially recognizing his lordship, his godship, and his power over your life. God, you will be the master of my life. Therefore, I want you to be in control. I don't want control. I want you, God, to be in control. I want you to be the judge. I want you to have the praise. And that's what right relationship with God really looks like. If you take a step back and you really look at your life, are there any areas of your life that you are really hanging on to control? Are there any things in your life that you have established yourself as the judge rather than God as the judge? Are there any areas of your life that you are unhealthily seeking the praise of other people, the applause, the pats on the back, because you need to be that center of attention? If so, those are areas of life to confess, to ask for forgiveness, and to put them back under the authority and the power of God. So the first thing that Noah does when he gets off the ark, it says that Noah built an altar to the Lord. Now, what is that building an altar? That is the act of worship. First thing that happens when Noah gets off the ark is, God, we want to worship you. Because worship is getting the attention and the focus off of me onto God where it needs to be. Worship is recognizing that he is the one who's worthy of praise, not me. He's the one who's deserving of praise, not me. So the first act that Noah did when he got off the ark was he wanted to build an altar to God in order to worship him. To worship the master, to worship the ruler, to worship the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, to worship the Creator, the first thing that he did. Now, how did he do this? Well, he took of every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Now, you remember in our previous sections that God had commanded Noah that he was to take a certain number of the clean animals, a certain number of the unclean animals on the ark with him. There was a certain number amount that was given that he was to take, and that was to be a part of the journey with him during that time. And so Noah took of the clean animals, the ones that were clean, and he offered them to God. Now, I believe, if memory serves, and I can't remember exactly how many we said, it was a few sessions ago that we covered that, but I believe it was 7 animals that they were to take of every clean animal. So with only 7 to repopulate the world, there's not a lot here that is available to be offered to God. But he said, I want you to take of this animal and I want you to offer it to God. Or he said, I'm going to offer it to God as an act of worship. So it was a sacrifice to do this. It was a sacrifice to offer to God what they had very little of. Do you know that every act of worship requires sacrifice? You are sacrificing. When you pray, you are sacrificing of your desires and your time. You're giving it to the Lord. Not praying what I want, but you're praying what the Lord wants, praying what His will is. When you give financially, when you tithe, you aren't just giving to a church or a ministry, you're giving it to the Lord. Tithing is an act of worship. It's an act of worship and adoration toward God. It's an act of faith and trust toward God, but it's a sacrifice. It will always cost you something. Worship of God always costs us something. It's an act of trusting Him. It's an act of obeying Him. It's an act of faith because I believe in my sacrifice you're going to come through. Now, I'm not trying to manipulate you, God, to make you come through, but it's a natural result of my heart longing after God, following God, that I naturally want to sacrifice things to Him. So, with only 7 of these animals to repopulate, giving one as an act of sacrifice of all of the clean birds, of all of the clean animals, was a massive thing. It was a massive giving toward God. It was a massive trusting. God, we trust you that you're going to repopulate the world, and we can trust you that you will handle it the way that you're going to handle it, and I want to offer this sacrifice to you. So they offered these sacrifices, every burnt offering, on the altar to God Himself in order to truly worship Him and show the commitment that they have to them. Now, Charles Spurgeon said this: common sense would have said, spare them. Don't give those animals, spare them, for you will want every one of them. But grace says, slay them, for they belong to God. Give Yahweh His due. That's the sacrifice. Hebrews 13:5 says we should give the sacrifice of praise to God. Romans 12:1 says the giving of ourselves is a sacrifice to God. We are called to sacrifice and present our own bodies as a living sacrifice to God. Costly sacrifice pleases God, not because God is greedy and wants to get as much from us as He possibly can, but because God Himself sacrificed such a great thing for us, His Son. God wants us to sacrifice in the same way, and it should cost us something. It should cost us. Now, in Ephesians 5:2, Paul says this. He says, walk in love, as Christ also has loved us and given Himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. We are offering God. David said in the book of Samuel, 2 Samuel, he said he would never offer to God that which cost him nothing. So it's a cost. He desires us to worship Him, and with that worship there is a cost. And God desires a sacrifice, not because we're trying to manipulate God into something, because it shows the condition of our hearts. It shows the longing of our hearts that we are willing to give all of ourselves to you. Is there anything in your life that you have sacrificed that has really been costly, but it was really a blessing because you were willing to sacrifice it for God Himself? That's what the sacrifice is, and that's the sacrifice that Noah made. Now, God's going to make a promise to Noah and to all mankind as a result of the flood and the wrath that happened, and the worship that Noah gives as he steps off of the ark. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. What was the soothing aroma? That was the smell of the sacrifice, the offering that was coming up to heaven, the offerings that were going up to God. Apparently, God loves the smell of grilling or burnt meat or burning meat, which we all love. We all love that smell of grilling. And there's a sweet smell in the offering that was given. And it was not just a literal smell, it was the odor of the heart. It was the aroma of the heart of Noah that you were willing to sacrifice and give to me. Well, God said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. So God does make a promise that the wrath of God is not going to come again until he returns. It's not going to happen again, even though he says the heart of the heart of mankind is still evil from his youth. Now, why does it say that it is still evil from his youth? What does that mean when he says this, that the man's heart is evil from his youth? Well, that is what is called the sin nature. You're going to see it represented in multiple different ways. You're going to see it being the sin nature. You could also see it referred to as the old man. You could see it referred to as the old Adam or just Adam. You're going to see it referred to as the flesh. And all of those things really are the same thing, the sin nature. Now, what are all of these things? Well, this is the nature of man that we are born with. We are born with this. We are born into sin. In sin, we were conceived. In sin, we were born. With sin, we are hardwired from the very beginning. It's almost like a genetic code that we are all born with. Everyone is born into this. The heart of man is evil from his youth. So what that would mean is from the very first moment that we are born. Did you know that little children are by nature very selfish? They think mostly of themselves. They want fed when they want to be fed. They want cleaned when they want to be cleaned. They want taken care of. They want the things that they want. It's the sin nature that is coming out. It is selfishness, the self-centeredness that is the sin nature. Now, why this happens and why we need to be born again is because we need to be born new. We need to be born and deal with the sin nature that is there. Our sin nature needs to come under the salvation that God provides. God has said that we will be evil from our youth, and that is the sin nature. Now, there's another aspect of sin, and that is what is called the sin acts. Sin is a twofold problem. So there are two problems with sin. The two problems of sin are these. You are born with sin, and then you naturally want to do sin. Jesus came to set us free. He came to cleanse us. He came to heal us. He came to make us so that we weren't evil in our hearts from the very beginning. He wants to come in and bring salvation, the grace of God, the forgiveness of God that will help us to be different from what we are born into. God says this, though, even though mankind is going to be evil, even though the sin nature will pass down, even though the genetic code is already written into them, I will not destroy them again as I have just done. So God has promised it will never happen again. The worldwide flood was a one-time event. It will never happen again. However, there will be a final correction when the Lord does return, and the wrath of God finally comes, and the world comes to an end, and the door is shut, and that's all that there is. That event will come to an end. But up to that point, God says, I will never destroy it in that manner. I will never destroy it with a flood ever again. So while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. Now, what are all those? Those are all the different, you can define it as the seasons. You can define it as years. You can define it as days, as months, as weeks. In other words, life is just going to keep going on. It's not going to stop. The seasons, the years, the days, the months, the weeks, the seed time in the spring, the harvest in the fall, the cold of the day, and the warm or the cold of the night, the warmth of the day, the cold of the winter, the warmth of the summer. All of this is just going to keep going on from the time of Noah until now. God has promised it's never going to be destroyed in that same manner ever again. Now, it doesn't say that it's not going to ever be destroyed in a different manner. It's just he will never again destroy every living thing as he has done in the manner that he had accomplished that. Well, let's turn to the next chapter, chapter 9. So God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth." That is an interesting statement, that the animals will have a fear of mankind. Every animal is in fear of mankind. They have dread. The dread of you, mankind, will be on every beast of the earth. Now, again, that goes against the theory and the thoughts of evolution, because the theory and the thoughts of evolution are just evolutionary steps along the way until you get to humanity. Lower evolutionary things should not be in fear of humanity, according to the model of evolution. But this is God's indication that, look, I have created a certain order. Mankind does not come after the animals. Mankind comes in authority over the animals. Sometimes in our society, we get that completely messed up and completely wrong. In fact, Paul talks about that in Romans chapter 1, when he says people will start to worship the creation rather than the creator. People will start to worship the, trees and animals. They don't deserve worship. Mankind is the highest in the process. Every animal will have the fear of you and dread on every beast of the earth, on every bird of the air, on all that move on the earth, and on all of the fish of the sea even. They are given into your hand. So mankind has authority over everything. They are given into your hand, and every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I have given you all things, even as the green herbs, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. In other words, do not eat it while it's alive. Do not eat it raw. No. So there you go. No sushi. You cannot eat raw fish. You need to make sure that the blood is not in it. I guess raw fish does not have the blood in it, but don't drink blood. Don't eat bug. By the way, that's a lot of the dark, evil paganism. Demonic activity really revolves around a lot of that. God has just put an end to that, saying, this is not how I have created you. This is not what I have given you. So what happens in all of this? Well, Noah and his family step off the ark. The first step that they do is they begin to worship. Noah sets up an altar. He sacrifices something that was very costly to them in order to repopulate the world. And if the animals are going to be food, if the green herbs are going to be food for us, we are sacrificing our potential food supply as well, not just the repopulation of the world. But God says, I'm giving this into your hand. They will go on from this point just trusting God. He will be with them. He will help them every step of the way. They will trust him and rely upon him. And we're going to see that in the book of Genesis now, we're going to have another 1,000 years that are going to really take place between now and about chapter 10, chapter 11, where we start seeing Abraham come into the story. So we have creation to Noah, and that was, again, 1,000 years. We have from Noah to Abraham, and that is another 1,000 years. So we see really in the first about 10, 11, 12 chapters, I can't remember exactly where the chapter is that Abraham comes in, but we can see that in the first 10 to 11 to 12 chapters of the Bible, we have 2,000 years of time that is being covered. So there's a lot that is happening that we just don't know, that God didn't intend for us to know, that he didn't think we needed to know. We just need to know the basic principles, and that is we trust him, we follow him, we walk with him, we obey him, and we worship him at every turn. And every act of worship is an act of sacrifice. Well, that's all we have for today. Next time we'll jump into it right there. And thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you back here next time.